to the New Levels Coaching podcast. We have been away on holiday, but we are back, and I'm glad to say that we are recording again. So welcome back to all our listeners and viewers who may be tuning in on YouTube. As always, we are the endurance podcast that brings you lots of inspiration and education so you can literally go away and run with it. This episode is all about nutrition and food. So hopefully you've got yourself a snack and maybe a brew to go with it as you listen in. I'm joined by Debbie Smith, who is based up at Leeds University, or in Leeds, sorry, at the university. I believe you're based on Headingley campus. Is that right, Debbie?
Yeah, that's right. Headingley campus at Leeds Beckett University.
I was going to say, I should get that right because I know the two universities are very different, but based at Leeds Beckett University. And Leeds is very much on the map at the moment in the endurance world. Most recently at the Olympics, we saw success from Beth Potter in the triathlon, who I know is based up there in Leeds. We also saw success on the track from the likes of Keely Hodgkinson and Georgia Bell, who are also part of that hub up there in Yorkshire. So lots of success. I know the infrastructure has changed as well a lot in Leeds. I was up there for a recent camp and it was amazing to see the new facilities up there. And also big changes in personnel, and Debbie and I have just been chatting about her growing team in the nutrition department at Leeds Beckett University. So I thought it'd be really good to get Debbie on to talk a lot more about nutrition and to give people insight into that world, because I know we get a lot of questions thrown our way when it comes to nutrition. So to kick us off, Debbie, as all our guests, I guess, enlighten us with is some form of inspiration. So I'm going to ask you, who inspired you to go into the line of work that you currently find yourself in?
Yeah, well, I guess when I left school, or sixth form it was, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I guess my parents encouraged me to do what I enjoyed. So I went and did a sports performance coaching degree. So I guess to some extent, my parents inspired me by just letting me do what I wanted to do. But while I was at uni, the person that gave me lots of opportunities and mentored me through an internship as well was Louise Sutton. So I guess she inspired me to continue the work and the nutrition career route that I was going down.
Brilliant. I've done a lot of work with Louise on camps and at the National Running Show as well, and a lot of our viewers and listeners will be familiar with her name, so I'm sure she'll be glad that she got a mention. But it's nice to hear that parents have inspired you. I was just chatting to somebody else recently who said that it was their parents. They weren't pushy parents, they were just encouraging parents. So it's always nice to hear that bit of inspiration. Well, welcome to the podcast, Debbie. It's a delight to have you on here. I guess where I want to start is to give people a bit more of an introduction to you and the work you do. But before we do, I'd just like you to chat a little bit about how you got into this line of work. So how did you find nutrition from that pathway that your parents kind of inspired you on?
Yeah, well, it was a performance coaching degree, so it covered all aspects of sport, but I just found myself really enjoying those nutrition modules. And so I started getting my own bits of work experience alongside what I was doing, which led me down the path to doing a master's degree in sport and exercise nutrition. And then after that, I went out and I worked in kind of health-based nutrition on a couple of projects. I moved down to London for it. But I still was missing that team culture and the enthusiasm and passion of working with athletes. So I worked with swimmers alongside my health-based work, and I ended up coming back to Leeds because there was an applied PhD in rugby. So I went into rugby nutrition. And then following that, I ended up with a full-time job lecturing at the university and also doing consultancy work here as well.
Well, I was trying to pick up the accent because I assume you're originally from around the Leeds area, Debbie, being a Yorkshire girl.
Yeah, definitely got the Yorkshire accent still.
So you went down to the big smoke, but what attracted you back really was Yorkshire, wasn't it? It's coming back to the roots.
Definitely was, yeah.
And then that's interesting that first off you went into rugby, because I'm visualizing like what rugby nutrition looks like, and I imagine it's eating a lot of food firstly, and a lot of guys bulking up. But I used to do a little bit of work in one of the Yorkshire Rugby League clubs actually over in Castleford. I used to do a apprenticeship in sport and excellence with the lads over there. But one thing they were really good at was their nutrition. I took a lot of inspiration from that, like how meticulous they were with it, even at a young age. But yeah, working with rugby league players, a lot different to where you find yourself now with working more with runners and athletes.
Yeah, definitely. So some rugby players need up to 4,500 calories a day, and it was
Wow.
just insane trying to find that amount of food for them to eat. So some of the menu planning there was insane. Um, but yeah, more so now I tend to work with runners, triathletes. I've actually worked with para powerlifters over the past few years, and athletes that run the Talented Athlete Scholarship Scheme. So some people might know it as TAS. We have a hub here at our university. So I work with a variety of athletes through that as well.
Yeah, the task scheme still going strong, isn't it? It's yeah, and obviously spin-offs of that with our younger athletes with what was the ACE program and now the DICE program, which I used to work on. Have you worked on those, Debbie? I feel
Yeah,
like
I've
you
done an
might have done. Yeah,
athletics and rugby one before, yeah.
yeah. So that's the exact program I'm talking about. Where used to work with Castleford, and then obviously used to work with British Athletics as well, which had a big nutrition element to that course and the nutrition consultations. So yeah, I guess just to kind of enlighten our audience a little bit further around what that current role looks like then. So you mentioned you work with a number of different sports currently, but I also believe you work with athletes of all abilities as well. So it's across a range of sports and a range of abilities.
Yeah. So it can be anywhere from recreational level athletes, people who are trying to run their first marathon or their first 10K, all the way up to more elite level athletes, or perhaps people who are taking on some bigger challenges. So they're wanting to run multiple marathons within a year, or training for more endurance-based events.
So have you ever been involved with one of Kevin Sinfield's like ridiculous challenges, which raise a heck of a lot of money for charity? So ridiculous as they are brilliant.
Yeah, he did actually work with a lot of people from our university for that, but I didn't do his nutrition support. But I've worked with him in the past when I worked in rugby.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
but yeah, just not for these crazy events that he's doing at the moment.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be plenty more as well. No, unfortunately, Rob has passed away, but has left an unbelievable legacy, and I'm sure Kev will continue to set himself challenges and raise a lot of money and awareness for what is a brilliant cause as well. So fast forward into kind of present day and where you are now, and one of the areas I want to start off with is because I imagine there are similarities here as well, Debbie. So a lot of what we see in the nutrition world, or certainly what we see as coaches, a lot of mistakes that people make. And I sometimes
Mm.
feel like identifying those are sometimes a good place to start. Are there trends across the board that you see with people making in everyday life, or even transparent across sports? Do you see mistakes that are made in rugby compared to athletics, or just generally what are the mistakes you tend to see out there?
Yeah, well, I guess the biggest generic one um, is just eating for health. So trying to eat your five a day, trying to eat the enough servings of dairy every day, the really basic ones. Um, People tend to fall short or aren't very consistent on eating for health. Um, Quite often, people can miss out some of their fueling for training. We all have busy lives, we've got families, we've got work. Sometimes we go straight from work to training, and that pre-training snack that is a great fuel source often gets neglected. And then another thing that is obviously big in runners is carbohydrate loading. And the more I work with runners, at the start I just assumed that everyone knew what carbohydrate loading was. We have to eat a huge amount of carbohydrates before the 24, 48 hours before a race. But what I've come to realise that people don't actually have any concept of what that amount is. So
Interesting.
often fall short of their requirements in the carbohydrate load as well.
That's really interesting. We talk a lot about it as a coaching team here around, we feel like it's like not, I guess it's not lack of intent, it's like lack of awareness. So like it's almost their understanding, as you said, of what they're eating and what those amounts look like. And people just assume, oh, well, I'm fueling enough. And to the general population, that might be enough. But when you're going out and running, say, 20, 30, 40 miles a week, you need to be adding to that. And it's definitely a common mistake that we see as well, where we just ask people to do like a short food diary before we recommend them to a nutritionist, and you just see that that's definitely falling short. But also, I think, we had a bit of a brief conversation before we came on. I feel like carbs got a bit of a bad name, especially on social media as well. And that maybe puts runners off. And I just find that mind blowing. I don't know if you see that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of briefly spoke about it earlier, didn't we? That you get a lot of fasted training. And, in some instances, it could work. But ultimately, when you've got anywhere from maybe 3 training sessions a week up to more elite end where you're looking at 5 to 10 training sessions per week, you want to make sure you're fueling that you're getting enough energy so that you're not fatigued during training, but kind of in everyday life as well. So it is really important to get the most out of the training sessions, that we are putting the fuel in our bodies.
And for our audience, that's a really good point, actually, because you're not just fueling for, say, your training session. You might be then fueling for your work day as well. Whereas a lot of elite athletes, they might be fueling for a training session, but then they might go back to bed and have a nap, and they're recovering like optimally. But with recreational runners who do this as their passion and their love for the sport, they might be doing a running session in the morning and then coming back. And I know this, it's certainly not everyone falls into this category, but some people think, oh, I've not got the time to make myself like a bit of breakfast. I'll just go to work and I'll put that breakfast off. But that then has a knock-on effect on your fatigue levels and also probably your work productivity, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly that. And kind of that's the whole analogy, isn't there, of the putting the right fuel in the car. You can't run your car on an empty tank, and it's a bit like that, I guess. I think I've heard you talking about the bucket analogy before, and I also use that a lot. Kind of the bucket referring to your muscle and the fluid within it being your glycogen stores. So when we consume these carbohydrates, they get stored in our muscles as glycogen, and that's what fuels our training. So if our bucket and glycogen stores aren't full, they're going to run out sooner. So we're going to start feeling tired sooner, whether that be within a training session or after a training session when we haven't topped that bucket back up. And it becomes even more important if you've got double training sessions in one day, or a training session, I don't know, let's say the next day, within quite a close proximity.
Yeah, I think this is a really good point, because there is a bit of a danger here where people see, oh, I should go and run fasted because it trains me to be better at like fat oxidation and that type of stuff. And I see it and I just think you're running such a high risk of, damaging things, and potentially like longer term damage where you might end up injured or fatigued. And also, from people who've tried this strategy in the past, people I know who've tried it, they just become miserable as well. They just don't seem to enjoy their training as much, and happy and healthy runners are often the best runners. And sometimes naturally people might go out in a morning and be fast. They might get up and have a drink and, a quick snack, and then go out if they're going out for an easy run. But I think what you're talking about here, Debbie, is like if you've got, say, a big session in the morning, or you're going out for a long run, you most certainly don't want to be going out on like an empty bucket as you're describing it.
Yeah, and there are times, like you said, where you can't get in a big enough meal. I mean, the nutrition guidance is that if we have a meal, it should be eaten 2 to 3 hours before to allow us to digest some of that. And if you're running before work, you're not going to be getting up at 4-5 o'clock to be able to get that full meal in. And so it's absolutely fine to have a smaller snack closer to training. But yes, definitely when you're going out on those longer runs, you want to be trying to get that carbohydrate in. And I'm not saying like start eating huge amounts of carbohydrate. I can give you an example from an athlete that I've been working with recently. I actually asked him if I could share this because we've been WhatsApping. And one of his goals was to introduce a small carbohydrate snack immediately before his training session.
Interesting.
And it was 40 grams. So we weren't even following the nutrition guidelines. We just wanted to try and get something in before training. So he got his 40 grams of carbohydrate either through a couple of slices of malt loaf, or he was using jam and bread. And he'd been messaging me and said, I felt a 20% improvement in my sessions just from that small snack. And now
Amazing.
he's realised he can tolerate that. He's getting more out of his training sessions. And now we're working on pushing that up to be closer to what the actual recommendations are for his. They're all worked out relative to body mass. So now we're pushing him that bit higher.
Nice. Jam and bread is my go-to. It's like my go-to snack. And again, it's not, I don't do it like 2 hours before. It's sometimes like I've got in from work, I've got maybe an hour to maybe not even that. Sometimes I just think, oh, just a slice of jam and bread, just get a little bit of carbs in there, quick sugars. White bread, of course, which I know gets a bit of a bad rep, but it's just a little bit quicker for absorption. So tend to go to that. But I think it's a really good point you make about, and we say it's not about perfection, it's about progress and not trying to do too much too soon as well. As you said, like 40 grams is probably a good place to start there for him as an individual, rather than thinking, oh God, I need to add this in and I'm going to try and do like exactly what it says on the tin to start off with. Sometimes just a little bit of progress is a good place to start, isn't it?
Yeah, and when it comes to nutrition, it is, I know everyone says this, but it really is a lot of trial and error. And I think that's sometimes why um, carbs might get the bad rep. Like you try and hit the big guidelines first and it doesn't work and you feel uncomfortable, you've got GI issues during a run. And so you dismiss that idea. But actually, if you'd have just tried a little bit less, jam and bread, for example, you have one slice instead of two, does that actually work better for you? And do you get more out of your training session from that? And then take it from there and start experimenting. It might be the type of food that you don't agree with. It might be a certain flavour. Let's say if you're using gels, I know sometimes some gels can feel a bit more acidic to some people than others, depending on the flavour, and you get that reflux. It could be that it needs to be in a fluid format rather than a food-based format so that you can digest it easier. So there's lots of different things that we can try and then progress it.
And that's a kind of a common observation we have as a coaching team is people will try things and then they'll just dismiss it straight away if it doesn't work. And they'll say, oh, that didn't work for me. But you've just given a great example of where it might not be that it's the food, it might be just too much of it. So, could you reduce it? Or it might just be that the stomach is getting used to it as well. So don't be afraid to like retry it, especially if you like it and you feel like, oh, I like that, but it maybe didn't sit right on my stomach. But there is a saying we use a lot with our athletes we work with about training the gut. And I believe, I'm going to ask the expert here, the nutritionist, but there is a lot of truth in training the gut and allowing yourself time to adjust to that.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, trying to make sure that you are practicing this during training before you get to a big race or event. And making sure that you're doing it over the longer runs as well and not just the shorter, easier runs, and seeing how you get on in terms of GI issues. And like I said earlier, it might be something simple that it needs to be in a fluid-based format rather than food. There's also different gels, which people might be aware of, where they have two different types of carbohydrate in them. And that means that they can be absorbed by two different mechanisms within our gut. So sometimes just changing a gel can help us absorb things better.
Yeah, again, just personal preference, isn't it? And recognizing not two people are the same, and you might have different. I don't know if some people like taste, some people like neutral, some people might not get on with a gel, but trialing those things. I know it can be an expensive hobby. That's one thing I've figured out. It's like,
Yeah.
but it doesn't always have to be gels either, does it? Like we said, that it could be other things that are a little bit more cost effective as well. I know some people literally swear by like jelly beans and those sort of things as well, which also give you sugars. I'm not saying everyone should fuel on jelly beans, but they're doing a similar thing, right?
Yeah, definitely. I always kind of recommend jelly beans during training, because it also mixes up that just sticky gel that you're consuming, and it just some people like a bit more variety.
Yeah, I am a big fan. I sometimes I get dragged into long runs with Gemma. I'm not a huge fan of like the long runs. I come from a middle distance background and I can tolerate gels and drinks for so long. And then eventually I just need some Haribo. And it's amazing what that does for me, like in terms of picking me up mentally as much as anything. I probably know that a gel would do the same thing, but I just need that mental break from what I've been absorbing, and I also need a little bit of a pick me up because I'm like, oh, okay, I'm getting a bit bored now. I've been out for 4 hours, and that Haribo is also something to look forward to as well. I know it's in there,
Yeah.
and I think that's important, and people shouldn't be scared of that, particularly if people know that they're going to be out for sort of 4, 5, 6 hours in the marathon. Then why not pack yourself a bit of a treat just to have that go-to? And certainly jelly beans, jelly babies, Haribos, they're all little things that you could put in your pouch as a little bit of a treat.
Yeah, definitely. Like you say, it's that almost that's something to look forward to. It's nice.
Yeah, and it's what works for you, isn't it? Gemma's she just did the OCC at UTMB, and she was out for nearly 7 hours. And going into the last aid station, she just wanted Coca-Cola. Like that's what, but she always does it. She knows it's there, and it's like it's her little treat. But it also has a bit of carbs in there, and it goes down well. And I know some people will be thinking Coca-Cola in the middle of a run, but it is just that treat of like, okay, I need something to get me through this last part. So why not find the thing that you like the most?
Yeah, and a little bit of caffeine in the cola as well, which is an added benefit.
That's what she said. That's exactly what she said. Yeah, a bit of caffeine in there just to push her up the last hill.
Yeah.
Something you said initially, Debbie, which I found, I actually got this from Louise at one of the camps that we worked on together in the National Running Show, and it stuck with me forever about how people often look at performance first and health second. And her takeaway message was, health first and performance second. I think that was a really good point you made about people make that mistake of not fueling enough for their health in general. But what do we mean by that? What, health first, performance second? What's the general message we're trying to send to people there?
Yeah, well, it's around basically following the healthy eating guidelines. People might have seen the Eat Well guide before, and it's that picture of a plate, and it's split into all these different food groups. So we've got our fruit and vegetable food group, and it's surprising how many people still don't achieve just the 5 fruit and vegetables per day. So it should be an 80-gram serving, which is roughly the size of your fist, or if it's dried fruit, it's about a tablespoon. But also they're a really good strategy to eat around training too. So a banana before going out on a run is going to give you about 30 grams of carbohydrate. So it's a great pre-training snack. Also, dried fruit can be a good strategy during training as well. So sticking raisins or dried apricots in your pockets, or just to have in your bag as that immediate pre-training snack. I'm a big fan of using dried fruit because it doesn't matter if you leave it in your bag all week and forget about it and it gets squashed and it gets warm because it's still always there. So yeah, eating for health is about getting your fruit and vegetables, making sure that we base meals around the carbohydrate foods, so the cereals, whole grain bread, rice, pasta. But like you said, there are instances where you might want the types of carbohydrates that absorb a bit quicker. So it might be your white pasta and bread. There's still a place for those. Making sure that we get our milk and dairy. They're really important for calcium, which helps us with our bone strength. And then making sure that we always have some protein in our meals as well, and that we're limiting our fats and sugars. So even though we've said use sugars during training, see if you can get them from the other food groups first before you go to the sweets and the sugary drinks.
The sugars thing, I'm going to go to that first because I've slowly started to cut this out of my diet, and I must admit it makes a massive difference to how I feel. I feel like, I need that sugar. I want it, chocolate bar, whatever. And when I cut it out recently, I maybe went on this kind of 2-3 week detox of not really touching it. I went back to it and I was like, I didn't really need that. And I almost felt like I didn't enjoy that either. So that was quite interesting. But I think a lot of sugar this is just my personal observation, is just habit. Like we just go to it because we know it's there. And it annoys me when you go to the supermarket, it's always in front of you. Like you get to checkout and it's like peppered around the checkout as well. Yeah. And it's so easy to grab, isn't it? And yeah, and it's often, again, annoys me a little bit. It's often like a cheaper option as well. It's easy to go and pick up a pound, chocolate bar or something. But there are better options out there and a lot healthier options. And there are still sugar in those things, like your fruits that you could go and get.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've had people that I work with that have actually said when they've gone through periods of cutting out sugar, um, that they've not really craved it, if you like. And then as soon as they start introducing it back in their diet, they get back to the old habits again.
Mm.
But yeah, we can definitely get it from our fruit and vegetables. Um, More so fruit for around training, for example, it's a really good snack to have.
Yeah, I guess, and I'm not telling everyone here, you have to cut these out. 'Cause I think it's also important to have like a treat and a balance and everything in moderation. Because yeah, there's nothing better than looking forward to something that you really want to treat yourself to. Um, Especially if you're not running long and getting those sugars on your runs, and why not treat yourself after a hard week or something? But it's more that I see people, particularly in a work environment, when I used to work in schools, for example, every day there's just like treats in the little staff room, and people bring things in. It's just easy just to keep picking at them and picking at them, and then it does just become a habit, and the body just becomes used to it, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And then, yeah, I mean, there's a section on the Eat Well guide that says have fats and sugars in your diet, but just limit them. And there's a time and a place, so they're really good strategy around training. So once you've eaten all your fruit and vegetables for the day and your carbohydrate-based foods, and we need that quick release of sugar during a training session, for example, they're just easy. Um, so yeah, definitely don't cut them out completely, because actually they can be a good fueling strategy. If we're eating loads of fruit and vegetables, actually they've got lots of fibre in them too, and it makes us feel quite full. We mentioned me working in rugby before. Actually eating a lot of protein and fibre gives you that feeling of fullness and makes it difficult to eat more.
Interesting.
So if it can be a really good strategy around training to get some simple sugars in, especially if you're not feeling hungry.
That was one of my questions actually, David, when you mentioned dried fruit. I'm always like fearful of dried fruit before sessions because I think to myself, God, I'll need the toilet if I do that. Is it, does it give you the gastric issues that kind of come with a reputation?
I know a lot of people that use it and are absolutely fine using it. So again, I guess it comes back to it depends on the person, and
Yeah.
you have to try it. I'm not talking huge amounts. It's about a tablespoon.
Right.
It's
Okay.
roughly about 30 grams. So I guess if you grab a whole bag of dried apricots, for example, and try munching on them throughout, then you probably are going to get some issues that we know about. But yeah, just small amount can work well.
Yeah, I know some people who I work with who they like packing them even for their race. They have them in there again. That's just an option they go to, and they don't have issues with it. But I guess it comes back to what we spoke about earlier as well, like training that and being used to it, and yeah, not overindulging on them. Like, oh, I've got a pack of apricots there, I'm going to see them all off. It's like,
Yeah, yeah.
it might give you issues. Whereas, like you say, just that small amount is obviously a little bit of a safer option because nobody wants to be running to the toilet mid marathon or mid race.
Yeah.
Um, that's really nicely linked. Oh, it's certainly going to nicely link me on to the next point around that. That's kind of fueling for health, and then when we talk about fueling for performance, particularly for runners and athletes, um, what are the sort of basic things that you would recommend that runners are doing that are basic that can help them keep that healthy balance and make sure they are fueling enough. And this maybe is slightly different to the general population because they obviously are exercising that little bit more.
Yeah, so definitely sticking to your regular 3 meals a day. So making sure you get a breakfast in, whether that has to come before or after training, depending on what time you're training in the morning. That doesn't matter. Your lunch and well, it's debatable what people call it. Depends on where you are, where you're listening, but lunch or dinner or tea. So your 3 meals a day. But the thing that we want to do around training is that we also have that immediately before training snack as well. So let's say you're running after work, you've had your lunch about 1 o'clock, and it gets about 3 or 4 o'clock. It's time to get in that pre-training snack, and this is often the one that gets neglected. So we want to be looking for around a 70-kilo athlete, about 70 grams of carbohydrate, if we can. And having that within the hour before. So it's a really simple sugar snack. So like we said about the bread, the malt loaf, a piece of fruit, some dried fruit, a cereal bar even. just to give us that little bit of extra energy before we train. And then it's also about fueling during the training session as well. So again, I'll often see people go out running a couple of hours, few hours at a time. And I'll say, oh, did you forget to write anything down in your diet diary here? You know, did you have any snacks? And literally they'll just be drinking water. So it's important that every hour we're trying to get anywhere between 30 up to 60 grams of carbohydrate in, if we're running for longer than an hour, that is. So that could be a gel, it could be a sports drink. They have about between 20 and 30 grams.
Interesting point as well, because I think there's a lot of, I guess, not necessarily literature and research, but certainly a lot of opinion coming out now that that's even starting to help with recovery post-session. So by fueling during the session, you're almost starting that recovery process. And I know people are starting to look into that a little bit more. And certainly as you go over that hour, as you say, towards 75 minutes, 90 minutes, and you're starting to deplete that a little bit more, if you're not fueling, are you just starting to delay that recovery process when you could have had some carbs in there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was a study that was actually showing it was mountain marathon runners, and it was showing them to consume up to 120 grams of carbohydrate
Yeah.
every hour. And yeah, all their muscle markers of damage were reduced compared to the groups that were having 90 grams and 60 grams every hour. That was all in male athletes, and they were all elite level athletes as well. So I don't know if because perhaps they did more training, they had more markers of muscle damage. I'm not sure, but yes, so it can help with recovery. And the other thing for me as well, if we go back to that bucket analogy, if you didn't quite have a full bucket at the beginning and you've almost drained it to the bottom, you've got more to top up before your next session. So again, in terms of your recovery, you've got to try and eat more to get back to your baseline again. And if you've done an evening training session and we have to start eating more, that can then impact our sleep, and then it kind of all has a knock-on effect for the following days and training sessions.
And some people find it really hard to eat post exercise as well. So like then you're totally right. Like that bucket's almost empty. We use the phone battery analogy a lot as well when it comes to fueling. Like you've drained your phone battery right down to the bottom. You're now got to recharge that phone, but actually you don't. The only way you're going to recharge that is by refueling. But you don't really want to stick the charger in because you don't feel like eating. So how are you going to get that energy back? And if you've been taking things during it, at least you've got a little bit in there already. And then having a look at maybe what strategies you do take after training. If you really struggle to consume foods or sort of solid food, then could it be something more like a milkshake or some form of shake, or and I'm not saying meal replacement shakes because I'm not a massive fan of them. I feel like if you can get a proper meal into you, then do. But it might be that you just need something in that sort of 30-minute to 1 hour window that you find a little bit easier to absorb. And that again would help to fill that bucket.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned milkshakes. They're one of my favourite post-training recommendations because we're replacing fluid that we've lost. We've got some natural electrolytes in there, which we might have lost when we're sweating. It's got protein. It's got the calcium in there we've been talking about for bone strength. And because of the flavours and the natural sugars in the milk as well, we've got some carbohydrate there too. So it's a really good all-round post-training snack. And if you're low on your 5 a day as well, you can throw in some berries, which are said to be good for inflammation, or you could throw in some other fruits as well, and also top up your other health nutrition recommendations.
Well, that was what I was going to say to you earlier. Actually, I forgot about that. Was when you mentioned about bananas and bananas. I'm not a huge fan of just eating bananas, but I love them in a smoothie. Like it's one of my go-tos in a smoothie. So just chopping the banana up and sticking it in a smoothie, I find I can get that in a lot easier. Or chopping it up and putting it in porridge and those sort of things. But actually eating a banana, I find quite tricky. So again, little tips like that about throwing your fruits into kind of a smoothie or a drink and blending that up. It's sometimes if people are struggling with their fruits in particular, then that's a good way of getting it in. I guess one question around the milkshakes, Debbie, I know some people obviously struggle with milk or have dietary requirements where they can't even take milk, are there other things that they could potentially be taking after training that almost act as like a different option apart from just your standard milk off a shelf?
Yeah, well, a lot of people like the milk-based alternatives, so soy milk, almond milk. The soy milk tends to have slightly higher protein than the other milks, so that is a better alternative for recovery. But it doesn't just obviously have to be a drink. We could look at yogurts and also the dairy-free versions of yogurts if we need to. It could be a simple tuna sandwich, for example, if you can stomach the food. It's made me think actually of the Leeds Marathon a couple of years ago. We did some sessions here at Leeds Beckett for people that were taking part. And a group of our students actually made lots of different recovery smoothies for the people that were there. And we had a few different flavours and everyone loved them and didn't realise how much of the post-training nutrition recommendations you were hitting with a smoothie.
It's amazing what you can get in there. The fun thing I find about it is you just build your own as well. It's like just shove everything in that I like and,
Yeah.
experiment with it. And yeah, I have it a lot when I go out for a run, say a 45-minute run in the morning, I get home and it's the first thing I'll do is make my kind of smoothie, and then I'll maybe go and get something a little bit more substantial after that. But I just find it's just very easy to do, particularly when it's hot. Helps a little bit with hydration as well, as you mentioned, because you're getting some fluid in there too. And it's just a cheap and easy way to get those nutritional benefits into you, definitely. I do have a question, Debbie, slightly off topic. You mentioned like the high carb fueling, particularly with those elites. One of my observations this year at UTMB when we were out there in Chamonix and the mountain runners, you referenced them. It was hot on the day of UTMB. They're running 100 miles and through the night it was very humid. And out of the top 20 male athletes on the start list, we only had 5 finish the race, so 15 DNF'd, a lot citing stomach issues. And I just wonder whether, because of that research and because it has been pushed to that kind of 120 gram level, I just wonder whether they were trying to like fuel too much through the night and whether they were trying to get too many carbs in and that actually caused stomach upset. I'm just hypothesizing. I have no idea if that's correct. But I'd be interested to get your thoughts on that, especially when they're trying to do that through the night as well. I just found that like quite mind blowing that they're going to consume that many carbs through the night in that heat.
Yeah, well, in that study that we keep talking about, I think there were a couple of participants that dropped out of the study because of GI issues. So the data was only actually on those that finished.
Interesting.
And also it was undertaken in cooler conditions. So yeah, that research hasn't actually been applied probably in the context that you're referring to. Possibly hydration could have been a concern if it was a lot more humid and warmer. So yeah, it could have been the carbohydrates. There could have been other things going on as well.
So it could be multifactorial, but it could be a consideration. Yeah, really interesting. You mentioned the hydration side of things, because I listened to an interview with Tom Evans, who was one of the elites from the UK who did unfortunately step off, and he said it was just a lot more humid than he thought it was going to be, and he was only in a t-shirt through the night. Usually they're like wrapping up through the night, and he was in a t-shirt, and he just said he found he was sweating a lot more than he usually would. And I guess at that point, it's easy to say in hindsight, but you've probably got to think like, do I need to adapt my fueling strategy a little bit here? Because I imagine you need to be taking on quite a lot more than you've probably planned for.
Yeah. And I guess it depends if there's food and fluid stations available, and it depends how much you're willing to carry on you. It depends on perhaps the amount of electrolytes that you put into that fluid that you're carrying as well. So yeah, I guess your whole strategy that you might have originally had in place can just go up in the air. I was working with a runner, was it Boston recently, where the temperature was just so much higher than expected. I think it went up about 10 degrees in 24 hours.
Yes, it did. Yeah.
And we had a whole fuel and hydration strategy in place, and that just went out the window to the point where he was having to stop and just drink at every station because he felt thirsty as well. So, yeah.
It's a really good point, yeah, because in Gemma's race that same week of the UTMB, they started in, and bearing in mind it was 8:15 in the morning, and they were starting in 19, 20 degrees, and by 12 o'clock when they were through to one of the aid stations, which is where I was, it was then 28 degrees, so it was pretty hot, and they're running for up to 7 hours. And the night before, when we got that information through, like, okay, this mountain forecast is now correct, because that's the issue as well. You never know if it's quite accurate until almost go time. And we sat down and I said, we're going to have to adapt here slightly. Even the race put out a hot weather warning, which meant you, instead of having the ability to carry 1 litre of fluid, all of a sudden you had to have the ability to carry 2 litres of fluid with you. So they're telling you, look, we know you need more. And with that, I just said to them, look, you need to be dunking your head in the water fountains a lot more. You need to be splashing water over yourself a lot more. And you also need to be drinking more. So fortunately, we knew exactly where the troughs were as well on the course. So I was saying, right, instead of just stopping at the aid stations, you now also need to stop at that trough, and that trough. Yeah. And what I found, I guess, fascinating was they had to stop even more than that. So they'd found other things where they were even refueling on top of that.
Wow.
And it shows, doesn't it, how much it can change from what you've maybe practiced and what you've maybe planned to what you actually need.
Yeah. And I guess you just have to listen to your body and try and be flexible with the things you did put in place. Some of the things that I'll do with runners is get them to weigh themselves before and after training sessions in different conditions, different temperatures, to get a rough idea of how much they lose. And for every kilo that we lose, it's about 1 litre of fluid. So we start to get a rough idea of what our own fluid requirements are.
Wow. And I understand that you're probably better off doing that like naked as well. So you weigh yourself naked before you go and afterwards, because otherwise the water absorbs into the clothes. Is that right, Debbie?
Yeah. So you'll get a more accurate idea. If you take your clothes off. But it just starts to give you a rough idea of how much you are losing. And it's really important, like I said, to try it on different types of training sessions in terms of temperatures and durations as well. And, if you've got a really windy day, it might be slightly different to if you've got a lovely, dry, hot, sunny day.
So the interesting point is, let's say, for example, I know I'm a heavy sweater, and I was on a training camp once in Portugal where it was hot, and over a duration, a long run, lost almost two kilos, which was high, and I know that was really high. So is it that I need to replenish up to 2 litres for the entire duration, or is it 2 litres an hour, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we you'd have to work it out on an hourly basis. You'd have to kind of do the maths and divide it by how long the training session was for. But let's say it was a 2-hour session and you lost, did you say 2 kilos?
2 kilos.
2 kilos, yeah. You're roughly losing about 1 kilo an hour. So it's roughly that you're losing about 1 litre an hour. Now, the guidance isn't to fully replace that during training, because sometimes that's impossible and you'll just feel it sloshing in your stomach. But we want to try and prevent some of that fluid loss if we can. The guidance is actually to drink 1.5 times what you've lost. So if you've lost 1 litre, to try and drink 1.5 litres. But again, we don't want to be overhydrating. So it's just kind of a rough idea.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point I wanted to get to, was like, we can work these things out, and the calculations was like the most important thing I was wanting to get from that, of how people can work it out themselves, because we do it obviously in training to work that out. But then the key to it is exactly as you've just said. I think people then think, I have to replace all of that. It's almost nigh impossible to do that. And I found that really tricky with the more you sweat. But knowing that you've got to replace more, I think, is the key here. And it comes back to the point you made. I guess, really early on, and you made it in relation to the amount of carbs. People don't understand the amount of carbs they're eating, like that lack of awareness. I also think there's a big lack of awareness here with how much people are sweating, and they don't realize sometimes just how much they're sweating. And I'll ask them, they've been out for a 3-hour run, and I'll say, oh, what did you carry, like, drinks wise? Oh, I just had a 500 ml soft flask for like 3 hours. And I'm like, God, yeah, I don't know how you can get by. And I definitely fell into this category coming from a middle distance background, but I think there's a lot people can learn from that. So a really good little tip there that they can do in their own training.
Yeah, and there's even more basic things we can do throughout the day, as simple as looking at the colour of our urine. So try and make sure that that's a nice light colour before we go out training, because we know the darker our urine is, the more dehydrated we are. So also it's coming back to that starting fuel, but also start hydrated as well where we can.
And you don't know what you don't know, because my first ever training camp in Portugal, I did that urine test, and that pretty much got told that I should be in the hospital because my urine was that dark. And
Oh, wow.
I'd never been on a training camp before. It was my first ever one. So it shows, we've all been there at some stage. But I just got there into Portugal, ran, had a small drink of water, my meal and a glass of Coke, got up the next day, gone out and ran, come back. And then the nutritionist and the physiologist like, what the heck have you drank since you've been here? And just not knowing, just, first ever time away. I think it was a real eye opener for me that, this is different to training at home. This is a lot warmer. And you are sweating a lot more, but also being aware of what you drink. And one of the best tips Louise gives, I think, every year at the running show is just carry a water bottle with you and actually look at what you're drinking throughout the day.
Yeah.
It's an easy way to measure it, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're more likely to sip on that regularly as well if you've got a bottle with you, rather than having to go and source that. And I don't know if you're at work, break away from your desk to go and get that. So if you've got it on you, you're more likely to just sip away slowly throughout the day, which is great.
Yeah, which makes life a lot easier, and more likely to do it. There was loads of good information to take away, but one thing I do want to cover before we wrap things up, and this conversation could go on for hours because I find it fascinating, and I know our listeners will be like, oh, keep going, well, maybe we have to do part 2 at another point in time. But loads and loads of like really important information there for people to digest, and hopefully can help them with their training. What about the things that we potentially see online, which I tend to call fads and things, Debbie? Is there things out there that you sometimes cringe at as a nutritionist where you think, God, that's not the best advice to be given? Because I certainly look at it and think, surely that isn't a thing. Anything that people should avoid that stands out to you?
Yeah, well, I guess my red flags when I see something is if it's really quick results over a short-term period. Basically, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. It's probably not supported by any scientific evidence. It's all the things where if they tell you to restrict a certain food group, that's kind of a red flag to me. If an example is restrict carbohydrates, carbs are bad for you. But we've spoken a lot about the benefits of carbs throughout this podcast. They might promote the use of specific ingredients or certain supplements. But again, and I guess they all tend to be, all the fad diets tend to be focused on losing body fat or losing body weight. And we know that lighter doesn't always mean faster. We need to be strong as well, so and in good health. So yeah, anything that is just kind of a quick fix, promising lots of body fat loss, quick results, I'd be staying away from, to be honest.
I'm glad you've said that. I literally called somebody out on social media this week, a big company, where they said, take this capsule and you will have 11% improvement in your VO2 max in 3 weeks. And I just thought, if it was that easy, hey? If it was that easy, we'd all be on it. So it's just take this capsule and that's it. You're done. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. But again, it's back to your message. It's just that quick win that everybody's looking for. And that's how they sell it, because it is a quick win and people think, oh, I'll have that quick win. And there are often in sport, there aren't any quick wins. If you're cutting corners, that's exactly what you are doing, cutting corners, and you're probably going to pay for it in the long run. So yeah, absolutely echo that message of, yeah, don't trust everything you see, particularly if they're trying to sell you the dream, because often it's not the dream. It's a lot of hard work, consistency, and balance and moderation that often gets yourself there. And sometimes, again, had this conversation with yourself and Louise, a lot of times basic is often best. But people just aren't willing to do the basics.
Yeah, and we had a little chat earlier, didn't we, about get the basics right first, and then the supplements are literally the icing on the cake. So try and get what you can through real foods. There are some supplements that we know are sometimes difficult to get through real foods. So sometimes, for example, caffeine, we might use that as a supplement around running. But yeah, try and get it through real foods first, and supplements is just the icing on the top.
Yeah, I think when you nutritionists describe it the best, when I'm always like, yeah, that's just hit the nail on the head. It's really hammered it home for me, is when it's like supplements are supplementing your normal diet. But you can get a lot from your normal diet first. If you need to supplement, by all means do. But when I see people taking all these supplements, and I'm thinking, God, there's a lot of that's already in your diet. And especially when I see things like on these, I don't know, active greens and all these things at the minute, and the minuscule amount of supplements that are in there, but a massive list of them. There's hardly anything in, and just huge lists of them. I just think, God, none of that's getting absorbed either. You'd be better off going just keeping your balanced diet and, yeah, doing the best you can with that. But yeah, I think it's a really good message to take home. Supplements are supplementary to your normal diet and your normal living.
Yeah, exactly. And if you start to get towards more of an elite level, there's actually the concern around contamination and doping and bringing back positive tests as well. So yeah, they can be quite risky in terms of when it comes to anti-doping requirements. So yeah, it's certainly best to get them through the diet. And the other exception, I guess, is if you've got a medical condition, so an iron deficiency,
Absolutely.
for example, then obviously you take your prescribed supplementation. Vitamin D for health is one that's actually a health recommendation over the winter months. So things like that, we might take them. But everything else, like you said about all these different greens and fancy proteins and whatever else, stick to the normal diet.
Stick to the normal diet. Well, I think we'll go with that as the key take-home message. Stick to the normal diet, keep it balanced, keep everything in moderation. And yeah, you can get a lot from that. And I know, you might be looking at supplements and things that you can use in the future, but if you stick to basics and do them well, you can go a very, very long way. Excellent. Well, I've loved that conversation, Debbie. Really insightful. And you've done a lot of work with us at New Levels Coaching. But just to kind of round things off, if people were wanting to get in touch with you or your ever-growing team up there at Leeds Beckett, how could they reach out to you directly?
Yeah, so we have a website. It is a bit tricky to find. But yeah, the Human Performance Hub at Leeds Beckett University. Usually if you type into Google nutrition Leeds Beckett or nutrition analysis Leeds Beckett, you might find it a little bit easier. But we're on social media. We have a few accounts. We've got the Health and Performance Hub. We're on Instagram and X. We've got our Carnegie School of Sport accounts as well that you can follow. Yeah, so website and the social media are probably the best ways to get in touch.
Good remembrance around X. I still call it Twitter. And yeah, you've nailed it there. I would have gone Twitter. And I always forget. I even search for it on my phone. I'm like, where's Twitter gone? I'm like, oh yeah, it's called X now.
It was a very conscious thought to try and do that.
Well, a good one at that. Well, what I will do is I will put the links in our show notes as well to go with the podcast. So it'll be in the description there, so people will know exactly where to find you and your brilliant team up there. I couldn't recommend you all highly enough. We have lots of athletes working with you now, and they all speak very, very highly of the services that you provide. And we've worked with yourself and Louise for years now. And also, if you go into a place like the National Running Show or Steve Cram training camps or some of our workshop and retreats that we do, then Louise is often an ever-present there. I know Debbie dips into different things throughout the year as well. So you may see other things at some of the workshops and things throughout the year. But if you want to find out more about how you could work with the team, then head over to those links, which I'll pop into the show notes. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Debbie. I really appreciate your time. I know our audience will have taken a lot from that. There's loads to digest, and maybe I can convince you to do a part 2 at some point, because I feel like there's still so much more we can digest. That's excusing the pun.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm not going to lie, I was very nervous at the beginning, but it's been a really nice chat, and I'd be happy to come back and have another chat with you and do some more podcasts.
I'm sure that will go down well with our audience. They'll be messaging me straight away, book Debbie in for part 2, because nutrition is a popular topic. But for those who have tuned in and listened, and if you've enjoyed the episode, then please do comment and share and like it, and share it with somebody who you may finds it very useful to listen to as well. We hope you've enjoyed it, and as always, we'll see you out there running, and if you are racing, best of luck. And a lot of marathons are coming up, so hope they all go very, very well for you. See you all again very soon, and thanks again.